Hello, this is Sarah Ashton with Political.tips, welcoming you to our first recorded version of Nevada Uncensored, where we're speaking with the people who push the narratives in Las Vegas and across the battle-born state. Joining me today is Ozzie Fumo, who's recently announced his run for Clark County District Attorney, taking on the incumbent Steve Wolfson in the Democratic primary. Ozzie, thank you for having time to join us on the show today.
Thank you for making time for me. Thank you for having me.
I'm sorry I'm not there in person on this Nevada Day. Happy Nevada Day.
Happy Nevada Day to you and everybody out there.
Perfect. So I'm in Arizona next time I'm there. Will hopefully be for your upcoming, or at least to report on your upcoming fundraiser, which I know you're having a kickoff event, which we'll talk about in a moment.
Sure.
I met you last year while you were running for what seat?
It was the Nevada State Supreme Court.
Nevada State Supreme Court, which I believe there's 7 members on it, correct?
Correct. I ran for an open seat in 2020.
Obviously, you're here speaking to me now, running for district attorney. Your last race was unsuccessful in reaching elected office. But did you take any wins from your last campaign in the sense of what you learned, what you heard from the people of Nevada?
Absolutely. In fact, on the campaign trail, I heard from people over and over, we wish you were running for district attorney and not Supreme Court at that time. It was a difficult campaign because of COVID. You know, everything changed. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. And I had run 2 successful campaigns before, and this was unprecedented. What happened? You know, it's basically what it comes down to is money. You know, when everything shut down in March of 2020, you know, I canceled my fundraiser. My opponent didn't. And he was able to successfully, you know, get many more donations. I think probably $500,000 more than me. I know he had $500,000 into a PAC from one individual alone. Mm-hmm. And you know, when you're that far behind with the money, it's hard to catch up and get the word out. But I don't regret a thing I did in that campaign, because I thought it was the right thing to do to cancel our event. You know, I didn't want to have a super spreader in March or April, and everything was unknown. We didn't know how fast this virus was progressing. We didn't know how, you know, we're telling you to wash your hands. Was it airborne? And so it was a decision that I made consciously, not to put people's lives at risk, and try to get the word out in other ways.
So you had mentioned, and I think that's very honorable of you to have made that decision, because where we are in the fall of 2021 is clearly not where we were during the early days of COVID, which upended so many primaries and really changed the trajectory of many races. You mentioned having won 2 terms to another seat, which I believe was the state assembly.
Yes.
And you talked about doing the right thing in the state assembly as well. One of the issues that maybe we'll reference as controversial, but ultimately passed, was bail reform. That bail reform bill, how would it go ahead and intersect if you are elected as the next Clark County District Attorney?
That's a great question. And that bail bill that I was unsuccessful in getting passed at the legislature is the reason that I wanted to run for the open seat at the Nevada State Supreme Court. So what we tried to do with bail reform there was to have the courts look to non-monetary conditions first. When I was up the legislature, I was beating the drum for justice, saying, you know, to the poor or to the rich, clout means you're out, but to the poor, bail means jail, right? You know, a rich person and a poor person get charged with the exact same crime and have the exact same bail amount. The rich person can afford to bail out, and the poor person sits there for a year or 2 before they get to trial. And what happens? They've lost their job, they've lost their family, they've lost their housing. It has a ripple effect on the economy. And so the bill that I wanted to put up there, I worked with Justice Hardesty a lot on that. I worked with other key players and stakeholders in that, and it was eventually unsuccessful in getting passed. But the Supreme Court took the language that Justice Hardesty and I had worked on. A lot of that language that I had in my bill is now in a bill that was, or a case that was passed called Valdez-Jimenez. And so in that case, it shifts the burden to the state to prove by clear and convincing evidence that a defendant should remain in custody, and they look to the defendant's financial ability to be able to get out. And so I'm proud of the work I did there. Although it was unsuccessful, it was successful in becoming law through case law. And then I had many Supreme Court justices pull me aside, saying that, we used that language, we respected what you did, and we think it was the right thing to do. So when the case finally came up to the Supreme Court, we were able to enact it into law.
We've just hit twice now on you doing the right thing. I believed, and I referenced it to the audience as a successful bill, because bail has changed since, I believe it was the 2018 session when you had introduced it. And now we're seeing some changes. You've been a longtime criminal defense attorney, in addition to a community leader. Do you foresee an issue moving from advocate for the accused, and clearly some of your clients will have pled out to different charges, juries will have found some of your clients guilty, but ultimately you're fighting for the innocence, you're fighting for the Constitution of those in the criminal justice system. Do you believe you'll have the Constitution within yourself to be an effective district attorney, since you'll be coming at it from the opposite perspective?
Absolutely, and Constitution is the right word, because that's exactly what I've been defending my entire career, is defending the Constitution. And I intend to do that for the people of Clark County when I'm elected district attorney, right? We need a district attorney that can show by leadership from the top, right? We have a district attorney's office that has great attorneys in there, but lousy leadership. Mm-hmm. And so I want to go in there as a leader, reform that office a little bit, but the attorneys in there are fantastic. They just haven't had a leader for the last 10 years. And I think I can definitely do that. I've gotten a lot of support from people inside the office, attorneys, investigators, paralegals, secretaries, pulling me aside and telling me what they think I need to hear, what should definitely be changed in that office. And it really comes down to the leadership.
Leadership's important. You run your own law firm. Let's talk about your campaign for a moment. Your last election, you came up short. Do you plan to take a greater lead as the candidate this time in campaign strategy? And what is your plan to be able to dislodge the incumbent, especially considering you're not going to be running in a general election, but in the closed Democratic primary with universal mail-in balloting as we now have?
Yeah, so last time we had a great campaign team, but it was the COVID situation that really, we credit or discredit for derailing our campaign, and it was the money that was brought in. Now, yeah, I've taken more of an active role, and not that I didn't before, but because it's more hands-on, because it's more grassroots this time. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you, after that election was over, it was, I want to say minutes, but days later, I was already receiving phone calls saying, "You've got to be our next candidate for district attorney. You've got the right message. You've got the vigor, the youth, the people are behind you in this." The message didn't resonate throughout the entire state, but it definitely will resonate throughout Clark County. And the people of Clark County want to change.
So the audience knows this. Speaking of change, I was working with a PAC in an attempt to get you elected last cycle in your run for Supreme Court.
Thank you.
This time, well, it was my pleasure. Again, you came up a bit short, but it was not due to lack of effort or due to messaging. You ran into some headwinds, as you've mentioned now, and this time the race is going to be different. Another thing that will happen this time is, since I'm on the media side of things versus the political side, I am not going to be able to necessarily support you or your opponent. However, I'll say this: somebody else looks to be doing the same thing. And that's the owners of Piero's Italian restaurant, where a few weeks ago, they were in the news for having the kickoff fundraiser for your opponent, Steve Wilson. And there was a protest outside by a group called More Than a Hashtag that is created to basically bring justice by people of color for the community, specifically focused on what is called by some the murder of Jorge Gomez by the LV MPD, and that they accuse Steve Wilson of covering it up. So the audience knows what took place. There was protest outside Piero's. At that point, the owners of Piero's had a bit of a heated confrontation, we'll put it this way, with the protesters. And at that point, things spilled over. There was a boycott, which from my understanding is over now. How did you come to be having your fundraiser kickoff coming up, I believe on November 4th, at the same place that your opponent did?
Thank you for bringing it. Yeah, November 4th at 5:30 to 7 o'clock, we're having our campaign kickoff at Piero's Restaurant, which is located at 355 Convention Center Drive. And they did host a party for my opponent. And a lot of restaurants will do that. You know, they'll take business from whoever comes in and says, we want to have an event here. It's just business to most of the restaurants there. However, I understand there was more than a hashtag was protesting, and rightfully so. You know, they have an issue, and they were ignored. Somebody died, and the district attorney didn't even take a look at it, never made a public comment on it, to my knowledge, and just closed the case. And I think that's part of the problem with the office, that lack of transparency. But to answer your question, though, how I got involved is the owners contacted me and said, look, we would like to, we've done one for opponents throughout our history here. They've been in business since 1983. And oftentimes they will take both sides of a political party and have parties for both. And they said, you know, we really want to help you get established, and we'd like you to have your first fundraiser, your kickoff, your announcement at our place on their dime. You know, they offered to do it, and I think probably it was to help with the publicity, to help, you know, with the damage control, I think, that was imposed upon them. But I think they're doing the right thing by saying we want to help out both sides and show that we're not for one candidate or the other. We will support both to come in here. So I was happy to accept their offer, and excited about being there. And we really hope we can fill the room.
I've been to one fundraiser there this election cycle for a candidate who will remain unnamed currently, because we're focused on your race. You mentioned transparency. You're going to be taking over an office that has tremendous power if you win. Maybe it's the most powerful position outside of a sitting judge in elected office in Nevada, due to the fact of the levers that you have access to that decide the fate of every single person who comes through the criminal justice system. The Clark County Public Defenders Unit, which recently graduated, I'll use that term, several members to the bench in the last election, is notoriously overworked, notoriously underfunded. Do you plan or have a plan to bring greater transparency to the negotiations within the inner legal workings? I don't mean to the press, but to the inner legal workings of working with the people on the other side, meaning the public defender's office.
Absolutely. And there's a lot to unpack with that question. You know, first and foremost, the public defenders do have a lot of cases and are overworked. When I was at the legislature, the Attorney General's office, who was run at that time by Adam Laxalt, sent somebody in to say how they have very complex cases, and they have about, I think, 20 cases per attorney in there, and the ABA rules say you can handle about 100 cases per attorney. On the other side of that, the public defender's office has about 350 cases per attorney. And I asked, they said, well, how can you rectify, how do you reconcile the fact that you only have 12 to 20 and they have 350? And they said, well, our cases are more complex. My answer to that was, do they get less complex when the public defender has to defend them? Because it's the same case. Now you take that with only their 12 to 20, and then you've got the district attorney's office also throwing cases at the public defender's office. You know, they're fighting cases from both. DAs only have the one angle, and they have a lot of cases, and I don't know the exact numbers of how many they have per attorney, but I would assume it's also over 100 cases per attorney, especially now that so many attorneys are retiring and leaving that office. And so the public defender's office is overworked and overwhelmed, and I do want to work with them. And my position would be to punish the deserving, go after the ones that really need it. These first-time nonviolent offenders, people we can get into programs, we don't need to waste taxpayer money going to trial on cases like that when you have rapists and murderers and home invaders out on the streets that we can really prosecute. And I think that the resources have been wasted. And I think in the first term, you'll see the amount of money that we can save the taxpayers of Clark County in just that. Put that in numbers for you. It costs about $150 a day to keep somebody in the Clark County Detention Center. You add that up to 365 days a year, we're paying $54,000 a year to keep somebody in custody. And there's about 15,000 people in custody in the state of Nevada. And maybe in just the Clark County, I think is 7,500. But that's like hundreds of millions of dollars, that we're spending per year out of our budget that we don't have to, because most of those people will come back to court on their own, and we don't need to prosecute. We can put them in programs for much less. You can send a kid to UNLV for much less than $54,000 a year. And so when I was at the legislature, they would ask me often, what can we do to stop this playground to pipeline, the prison pipeline that we have? And I would tell them, put money into early childhood education. That's the key. So the money that we can save from warehousing people, we can put into education and hopefully have a better society for everybody. The other thing to unpack a little bit more about your question is, I feel that the district attorney's office is too cozy with the judges. They're in the same building. They're in the RJC together. They park in the same parking lot together. They have the key pass to the back door elevators together. The public defenders don't have that. They're in a separate office, much older office, worn down, right? Homeless people in there. You have security guards at the RJC. You'd never see a homeless man defecating in the RJC stairwell, but you do see that at the public defender's office quite often. They're just treated different, and that's got to stop. One of the things that I would like to do when I become district attorney is go to Clark County Commission and say, look, with this money that we can save you, I'd like to have a separate office away from the RJC that we're an independent. You have the judiciary branch of government, and the district attorney's office is part of the executive branch. And having them in the same building is just incestuous to me. And so that's one of the things that I think we need to change.
You've now turned it back around on me by throwing a lot back for me to go in many directions with my next question. I was going to touch on restorative justice, which ties in with the playground to prison pipeline.
Sure. And
a lot of what you were talking about, making certain that the bad guys and bad ladies got locked up and other people can continue to be productive members of society. Rehabilitation versus punishment. However, you brought up something interesting that maybe a lot of people don't realize, which is the cozy connection between judges and the DA's office, and the back elevators and the back deals that get worked. A new batch of judges came on in 2020. I believe there was 10 to 12 new judges, several of them coming from the public defender's office. Have you noticed since January 4th, when they were all sworn in, any drop in quality with these judges? I'm not asking for any particular names, but what you feel the overall result of having all these new judges come in, many of them female, I believe all of them female except for one, on the judiciary and specifically those handling criminal justice cases?
I was so happy and so proud to see so many people from the defense side get into the judiciary, because what it did is it balanced the scales. We, for decades, had just prosecutors going, prosecutor pipeline into the bench. And I think society just finally got sick and tired of this, prosecuting and putting people away at all costs, because the war on drugs didn't work, and sending people to prison for life terms doesn't work. What we're doing here in Nevada is death by incarceration. We just keep sending them to prison and sending them to prison until they finally die in there. And a lot of it is we have guys in prison for marijuana cases that now it's legal, but they're still in prison. We've got to turn all of that around. And so I was so happy to see so many female defense attorneys get elected to the bench. Our society is 51% women. The bar is 51% women. And so it's got to change. We need a district attorney's office that looks like the community, and we don't have that. We have the district attorney and the same white males that run the criminal division for the last 20 years. Those kind of things, I think, need an adjustment. When I get in there, I want to look at that and review that and balance that out a little bit.
Let me push back on something you just said. While the numbers may indicate white males in the DA's office, two of our state senators, Melanie Scheibel and Nicole Canizaro, have positions of great power within the Nevada legislature. They also are assistant district attorneys. There is a case winding itself through the courts, which doesn't overlap with you being a DA, but would overlap with you taking over potentially as their elected head of the DA's office, that would separate the powers and state that state employees and county employees, governmental employees that are working in the executive branch can't overlap into the legislative community, which we saw during the last session was alleged to have held up certain acts such as the repeal of the death penalty. What is your take on having people working in government and also serving in government, especially when two of them may be your employees come next year?
So I was a defendant in that lawsuit as well, because I am an adjunct professor of law at Boyd Law School. And because Boyd is a public entity, being a professor, I was also a named defendant in that lawsuit. So I probably can't comment too much on it. I was dismissed off when I didn't run for re-election to the assembly. But you already kind of know my feeling about the separation of powers between the judiciary and the executive branch based on the judges and the district attorney's office being in the same building. And so I would lean towards that. I'd really want to look at the law. I'm excited to see how it turns out. And from a practical standpoint, I keep going back. I was a business major in University of San Diego, my undergrad, and I keep going back to the numbers of it. You know, you have two district attorneys who leave the office and although they don't get paid from the district attorney's office while they're at the legislature, because they're getting paid from the legislature, those jobs have to be held open. And so the district attorney's office can't hire new people to come in and take their places. And when you've got a district attorney's office that's bleeding like they are, with attorneys retiring and quitting and paralegals and staff, they're running around ragged, and they just don't have the manpower to replace the people while they're up there at the legislature. And so I would like to see more of a fine line drawn, but I'm gonna let the courts handle that and see how that plays out.
Let's pivot now back to one of the segments we were just talking about a few moments ago, restorative justice. I want to throw a hypothetical out there for you, just what every politician wants, since Michael Dukakis. You have somebody accused of sexual assault, but it's a case that in some states are known as statutory rape. Are you leaning towards, in this hypothetical, a rapist being allowed to be rehabbed under any circumstances?
Each case is fact driven. And so, you know, when you have statutory rape, is it, in your scenario, is it the case where the male is 17 years old and the female is 20 and she's charged with raping a younger man who's under, or let's say 16 is the age of consent, so he's 15 and she's 18. You know, if it's something like that where the age is very close, you know, I think there's something that can be tailored. You know, the heart wants what the heart wants, and kids, teenagers do those kind of things, you know, and they don't realize, you know, what they've done. If it's a situation where you have a 50-year-old man going after a 3-year-old, that's a different thing. That's a different situation altogether. So every case is fact-based driven. And someone like the second alternative, yeah, that person needs to be warehoused. And we have a prison in Nevada, Lovelock, that handles just sex offenders, keeps them there, and they can't get out until they show that they can be rehabilitated. But I can tell you, having practiced in the criminal defense world for the last 26 years, the majority of that second type of scenario, when you look into the psychosexual evaluation of that person, the person who is the offender is more often than not a victim when they were a child. And what the problem is we let that person down. We let that child down when they were 3 years old and when they were raped and when they were sexually assaulted, because we did not get them the counseling that they deserved. And so one of the things I'd like to put into play is a victim advocacy that just doesn't help with the victims of crime during the pendency of the case, but actually follows through. We need licensed clinical social workers more than ever to help these people, not just for the year and a half that the trial is going on and say, okay, we convicted him, he's out. But how are you doing 1 year later, 2 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later? Have you gotten the counseling, the therapy, the support that you need? Because that will stop the cycle, the majority of it, I believe, based on my experience, from that person becoming a defendant 25 years later.
So you're looking towards the future, clearly, and you're looking towards the human cost of every person involved in a case. A lot of people will say, that's Ozzie. Great heart, doesn't have the fortitude, not to run a race, but the fortitude to be able to deal with such situations because it's, quote, an impossibility. Before you answer, you turn around and you say, no, I have ways that we can come to these solutions. Great. A line has been drawn, this demarcation between conservative Democrats and progressive Democrats. This is going on throughout the nation, and it's also going on in the state of Nevada, very clearly on multiple levels. The way it seems from the outside is that the progressives, or so-called progressives, are supporting you. Conservative Democrats are supporting Steve Wolfson. How will you get your message out to those, quote, law and order Democrats that you are not soft on crime, that somebody doesn't say, you want a social worker when we need more prison guards because I don't want this in my backyard? What's your response? How do you plan to get your message through to those skeptics who say, that's Ozzie, he's too progressive?
Sure. Come sit down and talk to me. You know, one of my platforms or theories of our campaign is punish the deserving. You know, if, like I said, if the person is a murderer and if they've done it more than once, right, and they're what you call a serial killer, you know, that person deserves to be put away for the rest of their natural life. Someone who just can't get over the therapy and is going to just keep doing this, they need to be punished. And Lovelock does that. I'm not here to let everybody free. I'm here to punish the deserving is what our theory is going to be. And as the district attorney, I will take those cases myself. You'll actually see me in the courtroom arguing those things, arguing it, whether it's for bail for them, whether it's a sentence for them, but realizing what the cost is to the community to do that, and what it's going to be to take so that they don't come back. Because I think even those moderate Democrats, as you call them, would understand that you can't just warehouse everybody. Like I said, the war on drugs didn't work. Building new prisons didn't work. And so there are a lot of people that say we just need more prisons. We don't need new prisons. We can just fill them with those that are deserving, that need to be there, and let those that are sitting in there from drug cases that are now legal, like marijuana, out, and really fill those cells with the people that deserve it.
Let's talk about the sex offenders for a moment. You mentioned Lovelock, and you alluded to the fact that they have to reach certain parameters before they're released. This was a big push back in the early part of the 2000s. There was a lot of discussion regarding civil liberties. And does Nevada, and I wasn't expecting this to come up, does Nevada have the law in place, as some states do, where after a defendant's or convicted felon's time is expired, they can still be held on a civil basis? Is that the case in Nevada, do you know?
I don't know of a law that says we can hold them on a civil basis. I do know that we are holding people after their time is expired because they have no place to go, because they haven't processed the right paperwork. We have a place called Casa Grande where people, not just sex offenders, but those in custody, graduate to get out, and you're supposed to spend 6 months or 18 months there getting a job, but still living at the facility and doing things like that. Even on house arrest, they let people go. Once the district attorney's office is prosecuted the case and they get sent to prison, the Nevada Department of Corrections handles all of that. But to answer your question, I don't think there's a way to hold them civilly, but there is a way that they are being held if they don't have a place to go.
Second part of what you were just discussing, locking somebody away. Will you come out right now and discuss the death penalty? Are you pro or against death penalty? And all cases, some cases, talk to us about the death penalty.
So I was in the legislature for the 2017 and the 2019 session. In both sessions, I supported bills to abolish the death penalty. And the reason is because it doesn't work. You know, if you want to give somebody who's murdered somebody a great life, send them to death row, because they eat better, they're isolated from everybody, they get television, they get to work out, they're treated much better than general population. And you don't kill anybody here. You know, we haven't had an execution in years. We have the death chamber up there that hasn't been used in all that time, and we even put more, I think $3 million into it. That $3 million could have gone to give teachers better education, and the better education, give teachers better salary so they can educate better. The death penalty doesn't work. It's been proven over and over and over again. In 2013, the legislature had commissioned a study, and the district attorney's office, Clark County, refused to participate. So we don't know the numbers from the district attorney's office to the costs, but we pay the attorneys twice as much, or more, not twice as much, but you have two attorneys on the case, so it costs twice as much. You have more doctors involved, more things involved. So just prosecuting a case that's death penalty eligible, and most of them don't get it, costs like $500,000 per case. And so when you add up all those costs, it just doesn't work. And I can tell you from practicing criminal defense work, the defendants that I've represented, and I do capital work, they would rather receive the injection in the arm tomorrow and die than have to spend the rest of their life in prison. So if you really want to, if you want to punish somebody, if you want to give them the worst possible outcome, you give them a life without the possibility of parole, because that's their worst nightmares, to live in that cage for the rest of their life. It's an 8x8 cage. You get to go out once every other day to either brush your teeth and wash, or call your family or attorney. And sometimes your time to get out is 3 in the morning. So it's difficult to call your attorney, almost as difficult to call your family during that time. Your life is a living hell in there. People think it's a country club. It's absolutely not. But they would rather, the people that I've represented would rather die tomorrow than live like that for the rest of their life. So if punishment is really what you want for them, then that's what you would want, is life without the possibility of parole.
Speaking of life without parole, speaking of the death penalty, your case for Nevada Supreme Court, a lot of the messaging revolved around Fred Steeves, who was an innocent man. The district attorney and 2 of the judges involved didn't necessarily want to look at some of the evidence, the exculpatory evidence that came out. Eventually, Mr. Steeves was released. However, the Innocence Project, which you're familiar with for the viewers, the Innocence Project looks at DNA tests, some other evidence that could come after a case, and through different constitutional procedures, allows a person who's out of appeals to go free. So ultimately, are you going to be willing to look at cases and give resources to cases of people who have been convicted 5, 10, 20 years ago, and say our manpower, our women power, can be allocated to potentially freeing people and costing the state lots of money in lawsuits and deprivation of liberty payouts?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, and I've thought about it a lot. And the district attorney's office does have a conviction integrity unit, and it's inside the office. And that person or people that are in that department are supposed to look at those cases to see if there's anything that's happened. And over the years, you have things like DNA proving people innocent, confessions that were suppressed, evidence that was suppressed, like in the Fred Steeves case that clearly showed he wasn't even there. But what I would like to see is not having that office within the district attorney's office. And the reason I say that is because it's hard for someone to be appointed to that case and then look at the case that their best friend tried 3 years ago and say, sorry, buddy, you did this wrong. To look that person in the eyes, it's difficult to do. Do you have the intestinal fortitude to do that? I think it would be much better if you had a office outside the district attorney's office, possibly made up of a district attorney and a public defender and someone from the public. Like when there's bar hearings, I do a lot of bar hearings with attorneys that get in trouble. You have an attorney, sometimes a district attorney, and someone from the community, an independent person, just to look at that. And I think that's what we need. Someone from outside the office to really review those files and give them a fresh look. And I'm not saying what's being done now is wrong. I'm saying that the appearance of impropriety of having it within the office just doesn't sit well with me right now. Maybe when I get into the office and I look at it a little deeper, I might change my position on that. But looking at it now, I would like to see it be done from outside the office, someone truly independent.
Speaking of inside office, outside office, going back with prosecutors who you might have worked with, and then you have to look at their cases. I've spoken to some judges who deal with case sealing. And for those people who don't know what case sealing are, who are watching, it's when somebody has served their time. There's parameters. I believe you have to have had a clean record for 8 years. A certain amount of time has had to pass where you've been out of prison or off probation. And then you can go to have your case sealed, which means when you have a background check, it doesn't show up any further. It's no longer hindering your life as if you had been marked as a felon. So in this particular case, almost inevitably, district attorneys never want to allow sealing. Why do you think that is? If somebody served the time, why, and I don't just mean DA Wolfson's office, although those were the judges I've spoken with, why are people who are convicted of felonies still expected to carry this with them? And would you come down on a blanket, we're going to reject the case sealing? Or how would you handle it on the cases that come before your office?
Good question. I handle a lot of record sealings in my office. And so you have to have, if your case was dismissed, you can seal the record after 30 days. If it's a misdemeanor, you can seal it after a year. If it's a felony, there's various times. It could be 5 years, 7.5, or 10 years before you can actually seal it. And you have to have lived what you said, a good life, arrest-free, and shown that you've changed and that there's some remorse. And if you've met all those conditions, your record should be sealed per se. It just should be automatic. I don't like in the district attorney's office, and I think from the leadership down, it's changed lately, I think, with the last 2 legislative sessions. But before, they had this, we're opposing everything, everybody's getting objected to, and we're objected to every single case sealing. Take a step back. They've already paid their debt to society. They went to prison for 5 years, right? That A should be the scarlet letter should be removed from their back. And it should be automatic. It shouldn't just be that they have to apply. They've paid, like I said, paid their debt to society and done some now. And they've stayed out of trouble 5 years. And they've been a productive member of society. But when we refuse to seal those records, what we do is prevent them from becoming a more productive member of society because they can't get the job to help feed their family, put a roof over their head. They become a burden to their family because they have to say live at home because they can't get a job. Because if you're an employer and you've got someone there that's never been arrested versus someone that was arrested, even if it was 15 years ago, you're probably going to lean to that other person. But that person who probably has the motivation to work just as hard or harder than that other person to prove that they can do it, to prove that they were right, to prove that they are a productive member, and maybe that was just a mistake. And so, yeah, I'm a big proponent in sealing the records because, like I said, once the debt to society is paid, you should be allowed to sit on a jury, you should be allowed to vote, and you should be allowed to support yourself.
I know that you had a very limited amount of time due to how busy your law practice is. You're campaigning. It's a long weekend. So I've appreciated everything you've answered so far. I have a few more questions. Spouses of candidates oftentimes bear the brunt of time crunches and the ups and downs of a campaign. How is your wife and how is your family reacting to your run again when you just came off the campaign trail a few months ago?
Actually, I was approached to run for this seat, like I said, almost immediately after the last election, and didn't really make the decision until April or May. And my family was the first people that I went to, and my wife first, and my kids, and really talked about it because it is a grind, right? And people say lies about you in the public, or you read something that's totally false in the press, and it's hard for them to go through that. I feel more sorry for them because I know it's not true, but they've got to defend it, other places, or hearing it just hurts. And so the family, though, was very supportive, very involved. My wife is a student at UNR right now. She's getting her LCSW, licensed clinical social worker degree, as a master's degree online. But so she's full-time student right now. So I don't have her on the campaign trail. I'm sure that when she has time off, and she will join me on there. But she helps a lot with the messaging, a lot with the support, and I bounce probably every idea off of her. She is the I say we're a team, but she's the captain. So
sounds like the type of partnership that is at the very least necessary, and it's good to hear that you have that support. Speaking of teams, there are a lot of groups that vie for influence during election cycles, and they do so through what they call endorsements. Especially within the divided democratic world of Nevada politics, and we touched on it a little bit earlier, progressives versus conservatives, centrist, et cetera, et cetera. Are you going to actively seek out endorsements, or are you going to try to maintain some independence from these outside groups due to the office you're going to be holding, which has this great power that we discussed?
I will seek out endorsements from those that I respect. Those groups or organizations that I may not even apply for because it's just preset. But the unions in this state, what's run the state, and one of the campaign slogans I have is, it's we the people, not we the powerful, not we the privileged. It's we the people, and it's the people who work that are the backbones of Clark County. And so I will be seeking the endorsements of the labor unions and culinary unions and every union, SEIU, to go out there, because they're the ones that make this economy and make this engine run. It's not the powerful, it's not the casino owners or executives so much as it is the people that work there. They're the ones, they're the votes I want, they're the endorsements I want. And so, yeah, I will.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. During the campaign for the Supreme Court, a remark was made to me calling you a socialist. I do not believe that, from my understanding, you're not a socialist. I'm not sure if you are or not. The Democratic Socialists of Las Vegas are gaining influence, especially within the Nevada Democratic Party. That's no secret for those who watch closely. If the socialists, the Democratic Socialists of America, Vegas branch, endorses you, would you accept that endorsement?
I would accept the endorsement because I respect their group, and I think we are aligned a lot. But whether it's called a socialist or a Democrat or a liberal or a progressive, I do have ideas that are creative, and I don't want to go back to the same old. And so if their platform and alignments, whatever you call them, are something that I can get behind and something that I would endorse, then I would seek the endorsement from them as well. I wouldn't want to turn anybody away, like I said, unless I really didn't respect the group or they were diametrically opposed to something that I would, then yeah, I'm not going to seek that or accept that endorsement if it came. I had, when I was at the legislature, I had a check sent to me for $10,000 from a group that I didn't respect, and I sent the check back and said, I'm the kind of guy that leaves with the girl he came to the dance with, and what you stand for is opposite of what I believe in. And so, well, it's a lot of money, you can have it back. And a lot of people that I told that to were shocked because, in the campaign, it's all about money and how much you can raise, but I still have my principles.
So, final two questions. One is going to be about fundraising principles, etc. One's going to be a wild card. I've spoken to some of your past supporters in the legal community who think the world of you, but are scared to openly support you due to the belief that you have an uphill climb and that Steve Wolfson or Steve Wolfson's office could potentially seek retribution against them in the courts.
Actually,
how do you respond to that?
I've been told that by people, but we're going to win this race. So, and what I'm told by the people is, we know that you're such a good person that even when you win, you're not going to hold it against us like that other office would. So we might stay out or do this. They don't want to publicly endorse, but when the curtain's closed, they're going to endorse me. They're going to vote for me. And when their friends ask them privately, who do you support for this race? They're going to come out and support me. This is an uphill battle financially, but we've got the people behind us. We've got the community behind us, and it's an engine that can't be stopped. It's
two further. I'm going to add one more question in based on that, and then we'll go to the wild card. So, judges under judicial ethics can privately endorse. Again, I'm not asking for names. Have any judges come to you and said, Ozzie, we're either writing you a check, which they're allowed to do under Nevada judicial rules, or we're supporting you? How is the judiciary treating your race when it comes to individual judges that you may have spoken to?
A lot of the judges that I have talked to are very, very supportive, pull me aside and say, you've got my vote, congratulations. And that with doing things through teleconference, you don't get a lot of the interaction you normally would by appearing in a court. But I've gotten support not only from the judiciary, but from the office itself, from attorneys in the office, from investigators in the office, from paralegals, from support staff. The morale is lower than it's ever been in the last 20 years, they tell me. And so I've got a lot of support from inside that office. So
I'm going to wrap it up. I don't think you're going to be able to say much, but I want to ask you about a very famous Nevada. It is Nevada Day. Somebody whom I believe was railroaded in the judicial system at one point and literally got away with murder at a different time. Talk to me about O.J. Simpson.
I could go on for that case for forever. I represented Mr. Simpson in 2013 on his bid for new trial. Was one of the attorneys on that case, and there was a lot of issues in that case. And you know what Mr. Simpson was convicted of, you and I would have gotten probation for had we done the same thing in the Palace Station hotel room. You know, basically, kidnapping because he said, "Don't anybody leave this room." Utterly ridiculous. And the judge gave everybody else probation except for. So there was ulterior motives or thing there. He spent 9 to 33 years in prison. That was his sentence, and he did the full 9. Before he was released. So yeah, we could have a whole nother segment on that, starting from the 1995 case, really what happened there and what happened when he did his case here in Las Vegas. But that's probably too long to go in for just this last question. But
well, again, I knew you had him as a client, and ultimately it was seemingly harsh, the sentence he received, especially compared to the other co-defendants. I'm going to wrap this up now. Would you like to say anything to the audience before I take us away?
Yeah, please go to my website, Ozzie4DA. It's OZZIEFORDA.com. You can read more about me there. You can donate online there, which is the important thing. And even a $35 or $50 donation helps because they all add up. I want to thank you, Sarah, for your time and giving me this opportunity. And you're actually the first interview I've done. So,
well, I was excited when you said yes, because again, so the audience has the disclosure. I was excited by Ozzie's run for Supreme Court. I was appreciative, having lived in Las Vegas since 2004, appreciative of the work he's done in the assembly. And while I have to stay neutral in this case, for you to be able to come and share some of the inner workings with not the judiciary, well, even though you mentioned that, the district attorney's office, we appreciate you finding the time. And I look forward to getting this video up so that people can maybe reach out to you. And I hope down the road we can have you back on.
Absolutely. Look forward to seeing you at the kickoff.
Definitely. So to the viewers of Nevada Uncensored and to the readers of Political.tips, this is Sarah Ashton saying thank you. And we look forward to bringing more of Nevada's narrative moving ahead. Bye.